If you're going to be traveling to Southeast Asia, you need to add Angkor Wat to your itinerary. You only really need 3 days, and it's very structured and accessible. Angkor Wat is located right outside the city of Siem Reap, Cambodia, so it's very close to a lot of the common backpacking spots or travel spots in Southeast Asia. And on top of that, if you follow the tips that I'm going to be giving later on in this video, this 3-day stint is going to be like dead easy. You can literally turn your brain off and have a great time, which is a really great change of pace if you're burnt out from like constantly planning Southeast Asia. You also get to see a crazy historical site, which would honestly be a contender for 8th wonder of the world. Angkor Wat is the world's largest religious site and spans over 400 acres, which is the same as 302 football fields. I had to Google that. And I really think it's one of those places you just have to see for yourself. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can view Angkor Wat once you get to Siem Reap. Just go on Google, search Angkor Wat tour guide. You'll sure to find like a ton. But what I would recommend to my friends, and by extension you guys, because y'all my friends, is to do a TukTuk tour guide. The one that my girlfriend and I used and that I can actually really recommend is Trusty TukTuk. It's run by 2 brothers, Lee and Tom. It was a super great experience. And just to be completely honest, as a little disclaimer, I'm not that much of a history nerd. Like, I obviously enjoyed it because I went, but I wasn't there to see like the super deep intricacies of Angkor Wat and the whole entire history of it. Now, if you are really into history and you want to have the Indiana Jones type of immersion, I would actually recommend you book something else. The best way that I could explain this TukTuk tour is that if your friend came to visit you and you showed them around. It's like if you came to Toronto and I lived there and I would show you Niagara Falls. That's the kind of vibe that I'm getting from it. Now, obviously you can go longer, but I think 2 to 3 days is the perfect amount of time before you get like templed out and get kind of bored of the temples. So we did 3 days and our itinerary went something like this. Day 1 was a tour outside of the main Angkor Wat complex, with the highlights being Bakhong Temple, Preko Temple, and the floating village. So the highlight of this day was going to the floating village in Ton Slap, which is the largest lake in Southeast Asia. Now, this village is about a 1-hour drive from Siem Reap, and once you arrive to the dock, you have to pay $25 USD in order to enter the lake area. Now, depending on what time of year you go, you're going to either see a lot of houses that are floating together, or you're going to see a bunch of houses next to each other on stilts. You can then do an optional boat ride through the mangroves. Now, all in all, the floating village was a cool experience that I don't regret doing, but I don't necessarily think that I would do it again. Cost was relatively high in comparison to the other things that we could have done, and the 1-hour drive out honestly didn't really seem like it was worth it to me. I think I'd only really recommend the floating village if you're really wanting to see a floating village in general. So I just had some additional quick thoughts before you continue the video. While I don't necessarily think that going all the way out to the floating village is necessarily worth it, I think going through the countryside, seeing how other people live, seeing the animals and stuff like that was definitely worth it. So maybe not necessarily doing the floating village tour is worth it, but definitely exploring the countryside is worth it. Yeah, back to the video. Day 2 was focused on the non-main temples, and sorry in advance for butchering these. Pre Rup, East Mabon, Tasom, Pre Khan, and Bantre Sre. These temples are less popular than the main Angkor Wat temples, but are still really cool and definitely worth the look-see. My favorite from this day was definitely Bantre Sre. This is a temple that was specifically made for women. Now, the reason that I know this fact is that our tuk-tuk driver Tom, while not necessarily like a licensed professional guide for Angkor Wat, knew a ton of information about Angkor Wat, the temples, the whole entire region of Siem Reap, and about Cambodia in general. And Tom's been doing this for 10 years, so Angkor Wat and the surrounding area is kind of his bag. And to be honest, they got this tuk-tuk tour down to a science. What he would do is pick us up from our hotel, drive us to a temple, take us out, walk us through the temple, telling us interesting facts, interesting pieces of history, and then take some fire photos, take some fire b-roll, which I did not ask for, but I really appreciate, and then say, all right guys, I'm gonna go chill back at the tuk-tuk. You guys spend your time here, walk around, explore, do your thing, and when you come back, I'll have some cold water for you, and then we can go. And I think that mix of getting a little bit of historical information and then also getting to explore the temples at your own pace is like the perfect way to explore Angkor Wat and these temples. I also want to know that these tuk-tuk tours had the timings down to a science. Like, we would show up to a temple, we would get there basically empty. We explore, do our thing, go around. As we're leaving, 2 or 3 tour buses pull up. Now, we did go during shoulder season, which is a little bit less crowded than, during the peak season, but I will say that having a tour guide that knows when the tour bus is coming is super clutch. Now, day 3 was the sunrise tour of Angkor Wat and the main temples. This included sunrise at Angkor Wat and also exploring the Angkor Wat temple, Ta Prom, Ta Ni, Ta Ko, Victory Gate, Bayon Temple, and South Gate. These ones were easier to pronounce. Okay, so this day was a long one. Obviously, it's long if you have to wake up for sunrise. I think we got picked up at our hotel at 4:30 in the morning, so make sure you get a nice sleep and you pack a lot of snacks. But to be honest, waking up that early for the view is definitely worth it. Seeing the sunrise over Angkor Wat is definitely a bucket list activity, and I recommend you doing it if you have the chance. After sunrise, you're going to explore Angkor Wat and then do a bunch of other tours of temples around the area, which is like the main complex, I guess you would call it. The highlights of that day, aside from Angkor Wat, is Tomb Raider Temple, which is Ta Prom, and the Faces Temple, which is Bayon Temple. Now, if you're going to do this itinerary or a very similar itinerary, I really recommend leaving leaving Angkor Wat sunrise for the last day. I think if you're doing it the other way, where you see Angkor Wat first and then you see the other temples, you might be a little bit let down and disappointed after seeing like the best ones first, if that makes sense. Another note that I want to make is that you should not feel bad if you get templed out or like tired of seeing temples and thinking, oh, this is like the same thing over and over and over again. By the last day and by the last temple, everything started to look the same. I was so tired. It was super hot. I was just over it. So I just wanted to go home. So I think getting tired of the temples is definitely a real thing, and you should not feel bad about it if you do this trip. So just keep that in mind. Another thing to note is that because this is a religious site, they obviously have certain cultural rules and cultural practices that you should respect because you're going to a different country, different rules, etc. But one of the big ones is appropriate clothing, which means for dudes, no showing of knees. That means just wear pants. And for women, it's the same thing, but also for the shoulders. Now, having long pants definitely does not help with the whole heat exhaustion thing, but Tom with the cold waters was clutch, and once you start moving in that tuk-tuk, all that air, the tuk-tuk air is just gonna fix you up. You're gonna be blessed. So Angkor Wat was really cool, but my favorite actually ended up being Tap Prom, which is the Tomb Raider temple. It was just super cool to see the tree basically growing through the temple. Anyways, I've never actually seen Tomb Raider, but I will add it to my list now that I've been to Tap Prom. Like, read the manga before you watch the anime type. Tap Prom was really cool because Tom pointed out all the different things that were rebuilt over time and how they actually do the process of rebuilding these temples that have, are trying to stand the test of time through nature, right? So it's really cool to see the construction and how they're like balancing keeping it authentic while also, keeping them upright. By the way, this is where Tom also took really cute, unprompted photos of me and my girlfriend. Like, look at this. It looks like I'm in a meet cute. It looks like I'm in a K-drama. Anyways, my second favorite temple was Tani, which is a temple that's in the forest, completely overrun by trees and moss and vegetation. And I remember seeing a lot of moss on some of the temple stones just laying on the ground, because what they do is they go around searching for certain stones that would like kind of fit together in a jigsaw puzzle so they can put it back up. And while they don't have all the pieces, they just kind of lay it out on the floor or on the ground so that you can see what it's supposed to look like when it's up there, if that makes sense. Now, I would not have known that fact nor seen all of that information had I not gone with Tom or some kind of tour. So I definitely recommend going with one rather than, just getting a tuk-tuk driver to drive you from place to place. All right, let's talk money. In total, I spent 4 nights in Cambodia and effectively only had 3 full days to explore the area. I went with my girlfriend, and the total cost for 2 people, excluding the flights into Siem Reap, was $614 or around $300 a person. To get into Cambodia, you will have to get a visa. You can do this either at the border when you get off the plane, or you can do it online, which is what we did. We did it online, and the cost was $33 per person. To visit Angkor Wat, you will need a 3-day pass to get into the temples. They do sell 1-day passes, but if I'm being honest, I don't think it's worth coming all the way to Siem Reap for just 1 day to view Angkor Wat. So I think 3 days is the minimum that you want to do. And the cost for that 3-day pass is $62 per person. If you decide to do the floating village, it will be an additional $25 to do the boat tour, plus an additional $5 if you want to do the guided boat tour through the mangroves. For the TukTuk tour guide, Tom and Lee charge different rates depending on your itinerary, how many days you are, what things you're trying to do. And they're very flexible with their itinerary, so you can kind of customize, pick your own adventure type of thing. But the one that we did ended up being $90 for 3 days. But including a tip at the end, the total that we paid was $60 a person. For accommodations, we stayed 4 nights at Home de Chino de Angkor for $120 or $30 per night. This place was pretty good, nothing to complain about. Had a swimming pool, which was nice to relax in after a super hot day. And it's a little bit outside of the main town area and outside of Pub Street, so it's a little bit cheaper and a little bit quieter. Food in Siem Reap is very affordable. In total, for 2 people, we spent $88 or $44 a person. Now, in my experience, the food scene in Siem Reap is not as good as it is in Thailand, but that does not mean that the food is not good. My favorite dishes that I had while I was in Siem Reap was beef lok lak, fish amok, chicken amok, and char curry. For recommendations on places to actually eat, I really like Tevi's Place and Urban Tree Hut. Adding up souvenirs and other miscellaneous things, the total spend was $307. If you break that down per day, that's around $75 per day for 4 nights. And when you look at that face value number, it's kind of high when you're comparing to the rest of Southeast Asia, but pretty low considering that you get to see Angkor Wat, if you know what I mean. Here's some other quick things to know about Cambodia and Siem Reap. In Siem Reap, they take USD and the Cambodian riel, and USD is widely accepted in most places. Now, if you're using USD, you have to make sure the bills that you give them are very crisp and have no cuts or anything like that, so just make sure to keep that in mind. And I also don't remember a ton of places where I was able to use card. I'd also make sure not to go during hot season because it is really hot. I went in early October, which is just at the end of rainy season and the start of hot season, and it was super hot. I cannot imagine it being like 2 or 3 degrees even hotter than it was already. Dry season or hot season is also when you're going to get the most amount of tourists, so I not recommend going during that time and going during a shoulder season. But to be fair, we got pretty lucky with the rain. We only really got rained on while we were in the tuk-tuk and never when we were actually exploring any of the temples. So again, pretty lucky in that sense. But either way, I don't think I could handle the heat, and I don't think I could handle the crowds going another time of year. The town of Siem Reap itself is alright. There's an old town city center where there's night markets and a big day market, as well as pub street. But despite the town not really doing it for me, I don't think it mattered that much, because the main thing I was there to see was Angkor Wat anyways. And even though at the beginning of planning this trip, I was kind of on the fence, like, do I really want to go to Angkor Wat? Do I want to go to Siem Reap? Blah, blah, blah. And I do not regret the experience at all. And if you're curious about the actual spending, good for you, because I'm a nerd. I wrote down every single transaction that I did while I was in Siem Reap and also in Thailand. So I'll write down all the transactions that I had in the description. I'll either leave it in like a Google Doc, or I'll just paste the transactions right into the description. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comments. I will answer your questions. And if you want to see more of my face or hear more of my voice, you can click this video right here, where the algorithm picked a video by me specifically made for you.